We're delighted to welcome you back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Lateral here at the front lawn at Diggi Palace, Jaipur. It's our pleasure to present Of Matters, Military, Facts and Fictions, Cauvery Madhavan and Tim I. Gurung in conversation with Vayu Naidu. Indo-Irish writer Cauvery Madhavan's skillfully crafted novel, The Tainted, is set against the backdrop of a little-known episode in colonial history, the mutiny of the Connaught Rangers in 1920. The narrative depicts the complex hierarchies and uncertain loyalties of the times with a poignant love story at the heart of it. Ayo Gorkhali, A History of the Gurkhas by Tim I. Gurung, brings alive the story of the Gurkhas and evokes the fierce courage of their endurance and exploits in the British, Indian and Nepalese armies. In conversation with author and performance storyteller Vayu Naidu, they speak of the theatre of war and the human emotions that relate to it. Cauvery Madhavan was born in India and moved to Ireland 33 years ago. She is the author of 3 books of fiction titled Paddy Indian, The Uncoupling, and her latest book, The Tainted, which has received much critical acclaim. It was picked as one of Ireland's prestigious and Post's top summer reads 2020. She is currently working on her 4th novel. Tim I. Gurung joined the British Gurkhas at 17 and retired in 1993 as an Army Corporal, after which he became a businessman. Before his 50th birthday, he made a life-changing decision and became a full-time writer and has since written a dozen novels, including the acclaimed Gurkha book. Vayu Naidu is a Royal Literary Fund Fellow at Royal Holloway University of London, History Humanities 2019 to 2021. She is also Research Associate at the Centre for the Circulation of Literatures and Post-Colonial Studies at the South Asia Studies Institute at SOAS and is continuing her work with Mulosogi and the Being Human Project. Her novels are Sita's Ascent, The Sari of Surya Vilas. Her short story is titled Madurai, Mystery of Victoriana. Her next literary historical fiction, set in the 17th century England and India, is about a time of trade and treacherous transition and the triumph of art over tyranny. Please do remember to comment by typing it in the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, Of Matters, Military, Facts and Fictions, Cauvery Madhavan and Tim I. Gurung in conversation with Vayu Naidu.
Good morning to all our listeners and our very special guests, Cauvery Madhavan and Tim I. Gurung. I'm Vayu Naidu, and it's a real privilege to be spanning north of the equator 2 very interesting books and their writers. So we have Tim in Hong Kong. It's evening for him. The sun will be setting soon. And with Cauvery and me, we're in a similar zone, but Cauvery is in Ireland and I am here in England. I hope for many of you, you caught the snow moon. That's been the big excitement. And it's also another little triangle where Jupiter, Mercury, and Saturn are at the 3 points which are visible very early in the morning. Here we are, 3 points of a geography: Hong Kong, Cork, if I'm right, Cauvery, and London. So it's always important in these online historical moments to place the geography of things, because this is what our military matters, fiction and fact, are about. I just thought before I started a small introduction, it's a great moment to recall Gayatri Spivak on the subaltern status of those who read or write history. She says the difference is that the subaltern as object is supposed to be imagined in one case and real in another. But she is suggesting that there is a bit of both in both cases. She says the writer acknowledges this in relation to herself by claiming to do research. Her fiction is also historical. The historian might acknowledge this by looking at the mechanics of representation And she says, my history is also fictive. And I think that's a great way of announcing what we are going to share with you this morning. So, in looking at matters which are military has been a wonderful vehicle, and it was also a unique deployment of an early globalization. It was not with the same purpose as trade. It had a different set of values, and that's what we're going to open out in our discussion today. But under this value of the notion of protection of peoples, and in time, it also had shifting goalposts that marked boundaries of nationality and loyalty. These two books, Cauvery Madhavan's The Tainted and Ayo Gorkhali by Tim I. Gurung, are both literatures and histories. And I'm delighted to be sharing these writers' unique explorations of why they wanted to write these books. Our very recent history of January 6th, I'm not going to mention names or geographical locations, but the one thing that struck after an act of immense violence on humanity. What was remarkable was that one statesman did have the courage to say, it is not about who perpetrates the violence, but it has to be in time, in the present, and for the future of history, a history about us as people. And I find that this is what both these writers and their books do. Their books are about identity and belonging. It's true, many books are. Book jackets will flood the market with saying this is a book about identity. But here, these are about something very distinctive, and which is why I frame them as trailblazers. This is about identities which they discuss, which have been imposed on a people, the perceptions of identity from within the community and outside. And it is also about an identity that functions as an awakening. So it was terrific to have the time to explore so much about identity and its pathway into histories. So with that framework and handle, I'm going to invite Tim Gurung with his wonderful book, Ayo Gorkhali, to open out our conversation by telling us a little bit about the history, because once again, there are three players in the triangle: Nepal, Britain, and India. So Tim, I'm hoping you'll open up with a bit of the history of a time in terms of the linguistic terms and the spelling of Gurkha into Gurkha. So over to you, Tim.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It is my honor to be here. First of all, the Ayo Gorkhali is, as you know, is based on the Gurkhas, and the Gurkhas are worldwide, well known for their bravery and fighting skill. But for those who don't know much about them, I would like to give a very brief description about the Gurkhas. Gurkhas are not any group of people or something, but it's an institution that's more than over 200 years old now. And Gurkhas are actually the men from the Himalayan nation of Nepal who are serving in the British Crown for the last 200 years. And it is started in 1815, and currently they are serving in the British Army, Indian Army, Nepal Army, of course, and Singapore Police, and also in a Brunei Reserve Unit. Okay, the first time the Gurkhas and British clash was in 1767. That time, as you know, Nepal was quite a powerful nation, expanding its border from the Tista River in the east and Kangra Valley on the west. And there were only just a few of the regional power at the time, like the British East India Company, the Marathas, the Sikhs, and the Gurkhas. And of course, since they were on the expanding mood, they were to clash sooner or later. And that happened in 1814 when the Gurkhas and the British East India Company clashed and fought a war for 2 years, and which we all know as the Anglo-Gurkha War, 1814 to 1816. It was actually fought in two phases, and once the first phase finished, then the Gurkhas were almost lost, so they had to sign a treaty called Sugauli Treaty. And at that time, when the British saw the bravery and the hardship and how the Gurkhas fought against them, despite being very small in number as well as carrying very primitive weapons, they were so impressed that they invited them to join with them, because it was a better. The British decided that the Gurkhas was better to be on their side than the other side of the war. So they started during the war itself, when the war wasn't completed yet, with 5,000 men and established 3 Gurkha regiments on the spot in 1815. And that is from that day on, the Gurkha institution started, and it's still going on, strong even up today after over 200 years. And that was the main reason why the Gurkhas have been. And there wasn't a single war in which the Gurkhas didn't fight alongside the British from 1850.
Thank you, Tim. That's a brilliant sort of concise history of where we're coming from, effectively from 1767, and the understanding of, the Gurkha as regiments. And I'm going to just now invite Cauvery into our conversation. And so again, there's another very interesting 3 points of the triangle in your. But yours is novel, it's fiction, based very strongly on well-researched history, Cauvery. So could you tell us about the Anglo-Irish participation in empire in India?
Okay, Vayu, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here today at the Jaipur Lit Fest. A dream come true for me, really. My book, The Tainted, is about 3 groups of people. And one of them, two of them are, the Irish Catholic soldiers who served in the British Army, in the various regiments of the British Army, as well as the Anglo-Irish people who, were in the main officers, and that their whole participation in the British Empire is a little known. It's very little, it's hardly known in Ireland outside academic and military circles. So I was really keen in this book to bring out that fact that Ireland had such a massive role in keeping the empire going. I think even people in India don't realize what a huge role Ireland played, and it wasn't just military. They were Irish men in the main. Men in the main were part of keeping the empire going in every way, even in the civil service, whether it was whether they were managing tea estates or whether they were in telegraph, in the railways. They were everywhere.
I should have held up your book as well, and it's a very wonderful cover and title. Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But
no, not at all. So, the book, The Tainted, is about 3 groups of people. So it's the Anglo-Irish, who were mainly the officers in the regiment, then the Irish Catholic soldiers who were, very much tainted by the fact that they were serving the crown at the same time as Ireland was fighting for her independence. And then, of course, the third group of people were the progeny of these soldiers that were left behind in India that formed, over 300 years, which mainly were the sort of the ancestors of the basis of the Anglo-Indian community in India. So mine is also a three-pointed story, bringing the three groups of people together and to see what happened. It's loosely based on an actual event in Irish history. It was the mutiny of the Connaught Rangers in India, and they mutinied in India because of what was happening in Ireland with the Black and Tans. And these were a group of people. They were constabulary that were recruited, in the 20s by the British in order to help the existing police force in Ireland, the RIC. Basically to subjugate the population, and they were very brutal, very, very, very brutal in the methods they used. And this riled up the Irish soldiers in India, and they mutinied. So my story is about the events leading up to the mutiny as well as the aftermath.
And it's very interesting how intricately you start off with a particular story. It's a love story between effectively a doomed Irishman and a doomed Indian girl, and both of them. And one of the reasons why we were looking at this idea of identity, which is imposed, and how people from within those communities, of how they are perceived from outside, carry these identities. Like the Anglo-Indian Rose. Not wanting to be out in the sun, not wanting, and having this view of what Ireland is because of her father's connection to it. And actually her lover, Michael, telling, having these kind of flashbacks about what it's not like, people are starving back in Ireland. So it's so beautifully portrayed, and we will get back to that. So I'm just wondering if this might be an exciting time to actually open out with a small reading, and I'll invite you first, Tim, with the sort of idea as to why you set out to write this book. So if we could have a 2-minute reading from each of you, it'll evoke why you were so impassioned to write the books you'll have.
Okay. I think before I start reading the book, maybe I say something, because there must be thousands of books written on the Gurkhas, but as you know, they are mostly from the outsiders, and especially from those British officers who had served in the Gurkha regiment, and they mostly tell about only their side of the story. And as you know, the Gurkhas are a relatively very simple, straightforward, and easygoing people. And understandably, they also lack in education. Because of that, they didn't write their story. As of that, most of the Gurkhas' story were lost when they died. Because of that, the Gurkha story has become more or less rather one-sided. And, unless our side of the story was told, I genuinely thought that the Gurkha book story will be an incomplete one. That's why it was vital for us to tell our side of the story. That's why this book came in. Yeah. Okay. I will start from the introduction at the beginning, how the things, more or less it's the same thing. All the books regarding the Gurkhas so far have been mostly written from the Western point of view, and mainly by writers with military backgrounds. No matter how much objectivity they may have claimed in the end, it still ended up seeming somewhat one-sided. They mostly repeated the same two things again and again in all books. One was the bravery of the Gurkhas, and the other was the self-aggrandizement on the part of the British officer that had played a part in making the Gurkhas world famous. Their romanticized portrayals sounded almost like a myth. Recently, there have been some new Gurkha books written by Nepalese author, but they lack the military dynamics as well as international perspective and are somewhat politically motivated. The other side of the Gurkha story is unfortunately still not being told. Those who could have done so didn't, and the Gurkhas haven't so far written anything themselves. As a result, many stories, especially from the First and Second World War, were buried with them, leaving a large vacuum on their side of the story. The Gurkhas are only known as the bravest soldiers to the world, while the fact that they were also human like the rest of us is often forgotten. The Gurkha story also has two sides, and until both sides of the story are told and heard, the story will be incomplete. The Gurkha story is not only about bravery alone, but it's also the story of tragedy, which is what this book is all about. The other, that other side of the story. To make it a complete book and an easy read, I have divided the book into two parts. The first part repeats the history of the Gurkhas, as many books have already done before, and the later part covers the consequences of that very story. The Gurkha were not only brave soldiers but also victims, perennially and systematically betrayed by not only the British but also by their own government. And the only reason why nobody has talked about it is that everybody has forgotten about them. A story can be forgiven but not forgotten. That only that people didn't talk about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And the truth does always prevail at the end, including in the case of the Gurkhas history.
Thank you. That's such a moving opening and an absolute account when one reads the book. And also, Tim, the authenticity of your voice by your own service, serving with the Gurkhas. And it's an incredible history. But I'm just going to stop there to invite Cauvery to give us a brief reading from The Tainted.
Okay, so Vayu, I'm actually going to read just a very short few paragraphs, and this is the conflict that my character Michael Flaherty, Private Michael Flaherty, has as a result of having fallen in love with the Anglo-Irish girl. And soldiers in the army weren't allowed to marry for 7 years. They had to serve with the regiment for a minimum of 7 years, and very rarely, if they were out of Ireland, would they have been allowed to marry. So he's looking for advice of what to do, and he approaches a family friend who also happens to be the sergeant, and his name is Tom. So this is what Tom has to say. You asked me what I thought, and I'll tell it to you as I see it, Michael. Assuming she'll wait for you, 7 years. Jesus, she'll be an old maid. Have you seen what weather does to women out here in the East? And think of it, man. Your children could turn out to be darkies. When blood's diluted, the color will always come through. And it wouldn't be fair on the poor things. What would they do back in Ireland? You'll have to pick the ones to take and the ones to leave behind. Ask Rose, why was her mother in an orphanage? I bet you she wasn't white enough to take home, that's why. And why did Sean Toomey, the baconwala, marry her? It was because no white woman worth her salt would have wanted to marry an old Irishman gone native. So the baconwala goes to the orphanage, picks up a girl, as light a one as possible, and does her the big favor of marrying her. Oh, Michael, color can skip a generation, so you might get a few nasty surprises along the way. Tom had stopped to take a long drink from his bottle of beer before putting his elbows down on the table and confiding. You can be sure the baconwala won't be going home. He's been saying that for 20 years or more, since the day his time was up with the Rangers. Why would he want to go back to a hovel of a cottage in West Cork when he can live here with a bungalow to call his own, a business that more than pays the bills, and native servants salaaming him night and day. The daughter may have notions of all kinds, but the baconwala's no fool, Michael. Sure, he's a tradesman now, with a good name and a reputation. There's no living to be made down that sodden boreen that he was born in. And then Tom finished with a stern look. You don't be a damn fool yourself, Michael, and don't let Rose make one of you. So, it was that constant thing that all three groups of people in the book have, that they were never good enough for the others. The Anglo-Indians weren't good enough for India or for their father's people. The Irish soldiers who had served in the crown weren't good enough when they came back to Ireland because they had served the crown. And the Anglo-Irish officers who were, as a community, who were in limbo, really, definitely in the 20s, because they weren't British enough to be considered English, and they weren't Irish enough to be considered Irish. So, three groups of people in complete limbo.
Absolutely, and that's why I really think you've taken that new direction within the subaltern, and expressing that these are three sort of communities who are effectively feeling the oppression, and as you rightly brought out, Cauvery, I think both there was a certain generation in India which I think often congratulated the Irish insistence on creating the trigger or the leverage for India's own freedom struggle and rebellion. And of course, we have people like Margaret Noble, who in a way brought India's sort of awakening, if I could say that, to existing Indian people in the ICS and their younger generation. So I think it's so important that as a kind of second generation or a diaspora, you're reawakening it, but with this very interesting military history. I just at this point also wanted to ask you, in terms of your choices of voice, I just love the way you've dealt with it so delicately in terms of, for example, first person in terms of Rose's diary. Would you like to say, were these sort of choices, and was this the novel you intended to write right from the start?
Well, the novel, I think I'm one of those writers who writes by headlight. So, I always know, I know kind of the first 100 meters, I can see the first 100 meters ahead of me, but I can't see further beyond. And I kind of trust my characters then to take me, take me along. And I know that sounds very kind of airy-fairy, but genuinely that's how all my books have been written. And I just felt that, Rose's voice coming out through a diary was, was something it would have been an aspirational thing for a young Anglo-Indian girl, to write a diary in the fashion that, proper Angrezi girls wrote. So, that's why I picked to sort of have her voice through the diary. And then, of course, I have one of my favorite characters is the regimental chaplain, and I found him to be a very useful, very useful voice, because he was able to express the regimental view as well as the view from the men's point of from the men's lives. So he had a unique perspective, as do all regimental chaplains to this day. Regardless of which religion they are, regimental chaplains are a very unique bunch of people, because they have the heart and soul of the men that they are, that they're looking after, whose souls they're looking after.
No, it was a very moving account of him. I shouldn't give too much away, but it was brilliantly done about, when the execution takes place. I won't say of whose, but in a way, the chaplains, like you say, particularly in these regiments and overseas, or indeed like the battalion pundits. And interestingly, Cauvery, Tim, and I were all Faujis. We have a very strong background with our Fauji anchor, and the kind of final ethical vision the humanity, I think, or keeping the values going, no matter which side you're fighting on. That's the chaplain, that's the pundit, keeping the course. So I love the way each of you have brought forward, that thing of what I literally call this the pride and the prejudices, the romantic notion of the Gurkhas, who's writing the history from the outside, and in a way, you're really blazing the trail of speaking it from the voice of the communities, and you, Cauvery, placing it on the map, what the Irish did in and indeed for India. And they've always been that kind of lesser heard voice. I was just wondering if each of you could just talk a bit about, I think now we move into really sort of prejudices in one sense. And I think, Tim, in your title of your book, Ayo Gurkhali, and Gurkhali spelled with an O, and you mentioned something very interesting, that the whole term Gurkha doesn't really exist from the community within. Why did you choose that title? And just tell us the difference between the spelling of Gurkha and Gorkhali. Yes, do hold up the book once again so we see the spellings. Wonderful.
Yeah, actually the Ayo Gurkhali, that's in Nepali, of course, means literally means here comes the Gurkhas. But how it became so popular is whenever the Gurkhas were on the war or is on the war, when they are ready to attack the final enemy position with their kukri and rifle, whatever they have, right? Before they start the final attack, they cry out. This is actually a war cry for the Gurkhas. And it has become so popular that from the First World War and Second World War that almost everybody knows about it. I mean, those who have interest about the Gurkhas. That's why we try to put this directly into the cover so people will relate to it. Yeah, that's the main reason about the titles. Yeah.
And what does the spelling of Gurkha?
Yeah, yeah. As I said, Gurkhas is actually, as I already said, is not a community or any tribes or any caste from Nepal. Actually, it was made for the convenience of the Westerner, I mean, outsider, by the British, of course. And they used to call various names like Gurkhas, the Joni Gurkhas, Gurkhas, like that. But and finally, the British side of the Gurkhas, they started to use U from 1871. And then it became official spelling for the Gurkhas for the international term. But for the Indian Gurkhas and Nepalese Gurkhas, after the independence in 1947, in order to keep the same aligned with the Nepalese Gurkhas, the Indian Gurkhas still use the O, Gurkhas. That's the difference. But it means when you pronounce, of course, we all say the same thing, Gurkhas, Gurkhas, but only in written, the Gurkhas is the right, GU is for the outsider and the British term, and GO is for the Nepalese and the Indian Gurkhas term. That's the only differences. Yeah.
Okay,
And
thank
they
you.
have settled down for this. Now everywhere is the common one, even nearly everywhere. So that's the reason. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's great to have that kind of war cry as well. Cauvery, a bit about the title, Tainted. It's it was in common parlance, and that's where we move into the prejudice moment.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, the Irish Catholic soldiers who served in British armies, till very recently, till about 2 decades ago, families in Ireland never spoke of their uncles or their grandfathers, their fathers who would have served. And mind you, Irish people served in both the world wars and gave their lives. And they were never acknowledged in Ireland, which is a really sad thing. But that's come around now, and things have changed, and people are now happy to acknowledge that they had family in the armies. With the Anglo-Irish they were descendants of of the original, the plantations, as they would call, the conquering British that came and took over Ireland. So they were also tainted by association. And as we know, in India, Anglo-Indians have always been considered sort of neither here nor there. And it's a very unfortunate thing. But I have to say now, having written this book, I now see so much of the relevance of writing The Tainted is actually even more now than ever was, because even in India, if you think of intercaste marrying, or people marrying between states, people marrying people who speak a completely different language, that constant thing that you are something else, you're from somewhere else. And then internationally, like, for example, my own children, I'm writing about, in the book, I'm writing about mixed race people. And then into my own, it's come home to roost for me, because I know my children are grown up and they're probably going to all, sort of have Irish partners. In fact, they do have Irish partners. So in all likelihood, my own grandchildren will be mixed race. And, so it is something to think about, because people of mixed race have, they face all kinds of prejudices from both sides, which is what makes it so hard. When your father's people and your mother's people deny you, or have something to say about you, it makes for a very hard life. And I've written this book, and now I'm wondering for myself, what will my grandchildren have to face up, and what world will they have to live in? And I'm hoping that books like mine might change that a bit, even if it's only very slightly.
I think each of you, Tim and Cauvery, have given that, have been absolutely compelled and compelling. And this is the awakening side of the identity, that you express it from the insider for both the inside reader as well as the outsider. And it is a very authentic voice. And in a way, these sort of, in a way, yes, I opened by saying the military was one kind of device of an early globalization. And this is coming as an authentic voice, not romanticized from outsiders looking in to us. I think we've come to that wonderful moment of question time. And possibly within the question time, if you wanted, you could read and illustrate, but I'm sorry, the discussion, as one can do online, it's sort of taken over. But before we move into questions, I just want to say thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Cauvery, for this vibrant insider view onto histories to which we all, in a sense, belong to. So I'm going to open out with questions. Naina asks, and it's for Cauvery, what are you working on currently? And for both of you, if you can retain this question, how has the pandemic been for the both of you? Have you managed to write more within this period? Okay, we'll take those two questions first. So Cauvery, what are you working on currently? And then for Tim and you, how has the pandemic made you?
So I'm actually, my fourth book is set entirely in Ireland. It's set in the west of Ireland, on the Beara Peninsula, which is a very beautiful part of the country, quite remote, but absolutely stunningly beautiful part of the country. And it's set in the 1980s, and has a thread running through, a historical thread from 400 years before running through it. I'm not quite sure where the book is going to go at the moment, because as I said, I never really know how the story is going to pan out. But I'm enjoying working on it. The pandemic has been a bit strange in the sense that as a writer, you're always looking and hoping for time. You want to make time, and then suddenly with this pandemic, you have all the time in the world, and you're so distracted. So it had, for me, I'm sort of slowly plodding along with my writing, is how I'll put it.
Tim, how has the pandemic been for your writing?
Actually, for me, it doesn't matter that much, because I was a full-time writer. So I just come to my office and write, but I'm still doing that. So behind as I live in Hong Kong, and the pandemic has not been that much big difference, and hasn't made that big difference here. So for me, it doesn't make any difference at all. So I mean, I still come to office, and because I took writing as a office job, so I come to office right on my own time, my own time. So yeah, it's going on as well as before. So there's no problem at all.
I have to say, you're making me very envious, Tim,
Me too.
because I have to say, there are, I mean, in a way, I don't think we're alone in this, Kaveri, because I remember there was a sort of conversation with Philip Pullman, who said, and, you know, everybody asks, how has the pandemic been for you, thinking that all of us who write will just suddenly tear away, you know, great months and weeks of time coming up with this. And Philip Pullman really nailed it. He said, yes, it's lovely to, you know, keep writing, but there's sometimes you do have a little bit of a problem you want to solve in the direction of where your character is taking you or where the narrative is going. And just to get out and go and have a coffee. It's not the caffeine. It's just plotting something, and something gets resolved. And you know, I have to say, you know, in London, and I know where you are, Kaveri, we've had this thing about you can't go beyond a 6-mile radius out of where you live. There's no question of sitting anywhere and having a coffee. And of course, you're freezing your buns off, dare I say, to be standing in the cold and solving problems. You'll probably get chilblains by the time you come back. So I think, you know, there are different situations, and really envious of you, Tim. That's all I wanted to say. And very quickly, another question comes up saying, what were the books you researched on while writing Ayu Gurkhali and to you, Kaveri, The Tainted? So, Tim, if you could just mention a few, or I know you traveled a lot with your research as well.
Yeah, for the research of the book, I took 1 and almost 2 years. Then I visited 6 countries. Like I said, I'm in the UK, Myanmar, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Nepal. And even for Nepal, I went twice with my own team, and with a driver, a videographer, a coordinator, and myself. Then we started from the east and went through to the west for a whole month, and visiting all those areas where all those Gurkhas lived. And I was very lucky that I met over 100 Gurkha veterans, especially the World War II veterans who were over 90 to 100 years old. Then I think probably we will be the first and last people who met them and talk with them. So because they are already so old, you know. So after that, it was really, you know, I feel really proud and happy because of that. Then, yeah, of course, I read dozens of books, and then I watched many documentary, read all the articles, and I went to the museums, UK museums, and all everywhere, and also attended those, you know, those ceremonies, you know, memorials for the Gurkhas. And so, yeah, it was the one of the biggest project for me. Then I think the result has come out quite well. So, and the book is doing very well, and is being published by 4 different publishers all around the world. So I'm very happy because
Right. And it's a tremendous work. It's really a new direction to history. You've done, and also, like you mentioned, that, you know, you had to have a lot of oral interviews from a generation who are fast dying, and I wish you every success with it. Kaveri, tell us very quickly about your research with The Tainted.
So apart from the, you know, the primary research with the actual military stuff, I did a lot of lateral reading. So you know, I would have looked at things like the Army and Navy catalog. So like, you know, really fat 500-page catalog of just things to buy that people bought in those days, and it was really an eye opener. You know, like a social history nearly. And then I read a lot of women's accounts, women who are very high up, like, the sisters of viceroys who would have written a lot, and lots of letters from just very ordinary women who were bored, and wrote.
Correspondence was a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, and then, Anglo-Indian people kept diaries, and they wrote lots of letters, and some of them were published, have been published in journals and things. So, I got a lot of information from that. I also, for the tiger hunt scene, I took 6 months off just to read about big game hunting in India. And of course, Jim Corbett was like my guru for that, so a lot of my reading would have been sort of quite diverse, getting information from different sources, but about the same thing.
It's an extraordinary account, the hunt, and it's just a really wonderful pivoting point in the novel. I want to leave it on that cliffhanger, so everyone get your copies of The Tainted. And to everyone else, Ayo Gurkhali is, yes, a history of the past, but it is also about the current campaigns for the welfare of the Gurkhas. Please, please read these two books, because they are blazing new trails in history. I want to thank you both so much. My real comrades, Tim Gurung, Ayo Gurkhali, Cauvery Madhavan, The Tainted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vayu.
Thank you.
Wherever you all are.
Thank you, Cauvery Madhavan, Tim I. Gurung and Vayu Naidu for such an interesting conversation. We thank our celebration partner, Diageo. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. Do stay logged on, and we'll be back with our next session soon.